It is finally the day of the tune for the Supra. Well, actually, no, it's the night before, and I'm finishing up some last minute things before we hit the rollers tomorrow morning. Specifically, we needed to replace that super janky alternator plug. Luckily, we managed to snag a brand new one from Toyota, so I cut the old nasty plug off and wired in a fresh new one. After that, it was a quick run to make sure that the car was charging properly and that everything else seemed okay. Before I turned in for the night, I went through absolutely everything. Were the turbo oil lines okay? Was the fuel pressure okay? Did I install the intercooler pipes on properly? Then, I closed the hood for what seemed like the first time in ages, and went to bed. I got to SP bright and early that morning. I wasn't here to mess around. I was just here to make some jam. The car got strapped onto the dyno right away, and I gave Larry and the crew at SP a little refresher of my setup. Needless to say, they were hugely impressed, as was apparent from their laughing and general ridicule of pretty much every component. No matter though, the boys at SP know what they're doing, and although I was a bit nervous, I knew I was in safe hands. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with dyno tunes, it's actually quite boring. Most of it is simulating various amounts of load and tuning the car so it drives well in most every situation. In fact, Larry spent about 45 minutes just getting the idle perfect, because these 2200cc injectors do not like to idle nicely. Only later do the power runs come, so we'll just skip ahead to that. So far, the car seemed to be driving okay. At least, it hadn't exploded yet. However, there was one big issue. The car was only making 10 psi on the wastegate spring, despite the fact that the spring was rated to 15 psi. A second run confirmed this to be the case, and the car was only making about 400 wheel horsepower at 10 pounds. Of course, with the boost controller, we could crank it up, but by how much was the real question. And with the base 93 map done, we decided to fill her up with ethanol, turn up the boost, and find out. "530 horsepower at 15 pounds. Good. 570 horsepower at 17 pounds. We're getting there.
No flames though.
No flame. But then, on the next run, "590 horsepower at 18 pounds. Now, that seemed fine at first, but after chatting with Larry, it turns out that that was all the boost that we could make. The wastegate just wouldn't hold any more boost after that. We did one more run to confirm, and unfortunately, that was it. No matter how much more duty cycle we threw at the boost controller, the wastegate just didn't want to cooperate. Okay, so the car hasn't been tuned for even 24 hours now. Actually, not even, probably like 18 hours. Anyways, the car hasn't even been tuned for one day, and we're already tearing it apart. Such is life, such is the way of modifying a car. Basically, as you guys saw, what happened was wastegate spring that I bought, which was rated for the correct amount of boost that I wanted to run base pressure, ended up only doing 10 psi base pressure. Rule of thumb with boost control is generally you can do 2 times what your base boost pressure is. So ended up at 10 psi could only pull about 20 psi, which is 3 psi less than we made 2 years ago, and it ended up making about 30 horsepower less than we did 2 years ago. So it's super disappointing, but we know what to do, we know how to fix it, so we're gonna fix it right now. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna pop the hood, I'm gonna pull the downpipe off so I can get at the wastegate. I'm gonna pull the wastegate off, and then I'm gonna go to Sound Performance, and I'm going to hand them the wastegate. Larry's gonna pop it open and put springs in it until we can get it to read at 16 to 17 psi bass pressure on the bench. So we want to test it on the bench and, you know, get it to the exact pressure we need, and then he's gonna give it back to me. I'm gonna come stick it in the car, and then we're gonna take the car back to SP. They have me written in as like on call. So SP is usually booked like 2 months or so in advance. So they have me booked on call. So as soon as someone cancels, they're gonna give me a call and they're gonna be like, hey, you need to come in right now. You know, I'm just gonna take the car there and we're gonna get it tuned on high boost. So it'll need a retune for basically everything. For pump gas, it's only tuned at like 10 pounds right now, so it's gonna have to get tuned at 17 pounds for pump gas, and then up to 30 to 34 pounds for E85. Hopefully we should see numbers in the 700s for E85, maybe around 500 for pump gas. So that's what I'm hoping for. I think it's about all we can get with the way the car's set up now. We still have the big turbo sitting over there, but I don't think that'll end up going on, just because clutch and drive shaft and that kind of stuff would need to happen first. And at this point, I think we just want to enjoy the car. So that's the current plan. I'm gonna rip the downpipe off, get that wastegate out, and then we'll get to SP. So let's get started.
Single Turbo Supra life is just awesome, isn't it? That's right, buddy. We're here again. Suck it up and get your gloves on. And put my gloves on I did, because I'm sick of having fiberglass all over my hands. Wrapping that downpipe was great and all, but I've been itching for months now. You guys have seen me take apart this stuff so many times now, you could probably come to my garage and do it yourself, so I won't bother telling you how. Just know, I hated every second of it.
So, here's our old pal, Mr. Wastegate, and we are going to take him to Sound Performance and hopefully get him running at 16 to 17 pounds bass pressure. So, as per usual, Sound Performance comes through, and I swear, these guys are awesome. I cannot talk highly enough about them. Basically, went in there with the wastegate, they, you know, grabbed it, they're like, all right, we'll check it out. They tested it. It was actually making 16 pounds of pressure, but after talking to Larry, they're like, well, it's just such a big gate, it doesn't appear to open at the right time. So Larry did some quick calculations, and he's like, put 5 more pounds of pressure into the spring, check for boost leaks when you get home, and then make sure everything's hunky-dory when it gets back together, and it'll be good to go. And then I went up to Jen, God bless her heart, and I was like, when can I come in? And she's like, how about in 5 days? Not 2 months, 5 days. So we'll be back in next Tuesday, and we'll be finally getting our proper tune. So fingers crossed we'll be making some real horsepower, not just like 600 horsepower. Oh, God. So, cool. As soon as I got back home, I smashed that wastegate back on, likely breaking the world record for wastegate install time, and maybe number of curse words uttered in a single wrenching session. Here we are once again, getting strapped on and ready to make some peanut butter and jam. Larry got the car set up and warming up in record time,
so it was time to sit back and watch the fireworks happen. Oh yeah, 630 horsepower at 21 pounds. We were making good boost and the car was making great power with it. ...660 horsepower at 23 pounds. The car finally seemed like it was settling in and making the power it was always meant to. And then, Larry called us over and pointed something out. There was oil, and lots of it. But there was no hole in the side of the block. Mackie, eagle-eyed as usual, noticed that the dipstick tube was a bit out of place. Turns out the tube itself just popped out under boost and puked out a tiny bit of oil. This was a huge relief because it meant that we could fix it, top up the oil, and get back on the dyno. Turns out the dipstick tube bracket wasn't even bolted on. Another wonderful gift from the previous owner. Unfortunately, the zip tie that was being used instead wasn't really cutting it, so we fixed the bracket and bolted it on properly. After we were done, back on the dyno she went. This thing's been on and off SP's rollers more time in the last week than most Supras do in a lifetime. Larry ran the car for a little bit and double-checked that everything was good, and after giving it the green light, started piling on the boost. .685 at 24 pounds. Oh yes. .707 freaking horsepower at 26 pounds of furious JDM boost. And then Larry shut it down and said, "That's all we get today." Sadly, we were only at about 65% ethanol, so Larry advised against putting more boost in it, to keep things safe. Plus, he probably thought I would kill myself with any more horsepower. Joke's on him though. I can kill myself just fine with this much horsepower, so, ha!